Alrighty, Matt. Welcome back to the Integrated Athlete Podcast, mate. I'm happy to have you back on. Thanks for coming on.
Pleasure.
Awesome. So, in our first podcast, we had a bit of a chat around a number of topics. So, I thought it'd be nice, if anyone that didn't listen to that podcast, definitely go back and re-listen to that first episode because there was a lot of great things in there. But I thought we'd start with kind of more the physicality side of things in our training and that sort of stuff for today's discussion. And when we work in terms of like the CHEK approach, we always start with what it's the one love, what's the client's their goal or their dream or their objective? What do they really want to kind of get out of the program or get out of their lives? What do they want to change? So kind of that idea of, really focusing on what you do want versus on what you don't want. So maybe if we could have a bit of a chat about just the importance of having goals and having clearly stated dreams as well.
Well, it's important there's multiple layers to that, which I'm going to keep on point. To have a dream, firstly, is the most important thing, because otherwise, what are you working for? And if you've got something to work for, you know if it's sustainable or not. If it's a labor of love, which hopefully is a dream, then it's sustainable. But if you're doing it because someone else wants you to do it, then your heart's not going to be in it. So how good a job are you going to do? Not great. So if we have a dream that's strong enough in us, that's greater than any fear of failure, then that's worth pursuing, because we've got the drive behind it, that our heart's behind that goal. And everything starts with a dream. Everything starts with a single thought. And if you can get the thought aligned with the heart, then there's nothing that can really stop you. So the importance of dreaming is number one, really. There's can't remember who said it, but if you have a strong enough dream, you don't need a crisis. I think it was Jerry Wesh that said that. And he's saying that if your dream is driving your training, your eating, your whatever your current goal is, then it doesn't matter what little crises come in the way. They're just little speed humps, and you've got the vision to go. And where the eyes go, the body follows. But that's not only the physical eyes, it's also the dreaming eye as well. Your entire body will follow that. So with that said, you can get possessed to a degree that you will crawl over broken glass to get there. And that's where the two forces come in, which is the yin and the yang, the night, the day, the summer, winter, however you want to look at that. So those two need to be balanced in relation to the dream, and realize that we're not going to get the dream straight away. If we did, it wouldn't probably be worth pursuing. So yeah, dreaming's kind of a big deal.
Definitely, hey. And I think you can break it down to so many levels, right? You can think about like if you're at that stage of your life where you can think about and visualize your overarching life's legacy, so to speak. And then you can break that down right into maybe smaller goals, 5 or 10-year goals, 1-year goals, and then break it down from there. Is that sort of the process that you'd like to follow with people?
It depends on the person. I think a lot of people they'll start something and not finish it. So that can be going to the gym and not ever going, starting a project but never finishing it. And that's the equivalent of sitting on the couch with your remote going flick, 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 flick. So that's not really high performance. High performance is having a dream that's strong enough, energizing that with enough energy to make it happen into physical reality. That's the true definition of high performance. Most people think high performance is, they correlate that to running faster, jumping higher, where in reality it's bringing something non-physical into physical reality. And where we start with that, it really depends on the person's kind of dream language, if you will, and how they articulate it and how it works for them. But most commonly, it's the flick, 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 flick people that probably struggle the most, because they have this huge dream and they want to get there, but they're very easily distracted, or they have to throw a spanner in the works and screw everything up, or whatever it might be. Any excuse will do. Poor me, I can't do that because my dog died when I was 10. Whatever the story is that they're telling themselves. So it really depends on the person. But if it's strong enough in the person, then I actually interview them to make sure it's strong enough into them. And the question I ask to some people is, "Are you ready to die?" They're kind of taken aback by that, and obviously not talking about a literal physical death, but for them to get to want to see me or get to need to see me, they've been in a crisis for long enough to reach out to someone like me to work on them in a different way that they've never probably worked with anyone before. So I say to them, well, a part of you has to die. And that's what the virgin birth's all about. Have you died to your kind of animal ways, if you will, being, fear of safety, fear of security, fear of food, fear of sex, fear of self-esteem, all that kind of stuff. Have you died to that, and are you now reborn into your, let's say, spiritual self? And that's really the driver. That's your beacon. And we don't see we see a dream as, first of all, there's a battle and a war with everything. So let's talk weight loss just as a quick example. The battle is going to the gym every day or every other day. The war is at home when you open up the cupboard or the fridge at the end of the day. That's where the war is. The war is the sleep. The war is the hydration, the nutrition, the resting. That's where the war is. But the battle, if you can win most of the battles and you're winning the war, then you've got a really good chance of getting to where you want to go. If you think that, you're going to the gym, working your ass off, that gives you a license to kind of give yourself more leeway in the war, then your chances of achieving that is really quite diminished to the degree that you allow it to do that. So there's, the mind is the builder of our reality. It's the emotions that are attached to it that are in a GPS system that take us towards or away from it. It's our physical vehicle that's really just along for the ride, and it's spirit that animates it all. So if we can get mind, body, spirit in alignment with each other, then what can possibly stop you?
Yeah, I think that's where magic happens, right? Like when you can, as you're saying, you align mind, body, spirit, and I think one of the first part of the question that I asked you was, focusing on what you do want versus what you don't want. But in my experience, in my past, and I know with a lot of people, particularly a lot of clients that I've worked with in the past, it's all they can think is at the time they're in a bit of a crisis. So all they can think about is what they don't want.
Well, we're wired to. We're socially conditioned to focus on what's missing and what's wrong in life. And to a degree, that's helpful for survival because we're wired to see what's missing in the environment or what's not quite right. But since early life, we're conditioned to focus on how much money we don't have, what kind of relationships we don't have, or what we don't want. So, in a you can use it in a way of clarity of experiencing what you don't want can create you to know what you do want. On the flip side of that, you can get lost in what you don't want, and then you just focus on that, and then that becomes your kind of unofficial dream, and then you don't like it when you get there because you focus on it so hard you can't see anything else.
Yeah. I think it's definitely a skill, right? Like training yourself to see the good in things and see what you do have. I don't know, it's a bit cliche, everyone talks about having a gratitude practice and that sort of stuff, but if you can legitimately feel gratitude for what you do have in your life right now, or even, like the work of Joe Dispenza and those sort of people, right? Like you're visualizing and feeling what it is that you do want to experience before you even have it in the physical.
Yeah.
And then that's perhaps a means of starting to shift your way of thinking and perceiving.
And even if you can sit in the contentment of knowing that it's on its way,
and
you might not be ready for it yet. That's why they say be careful what you wish for because you might just get it.
Yeah.
And I've encountered many, many, many of those people. I've probably been one myself at some point. And all of a sudden, oh shit, okay, this is what I asked for. I'm not ready for this. And yeah, so then you go to another crisis about what you do want, and it comes back to clarity.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, having clarity for what you do want, and then maybe if there's a part of you that believes you're not worthy of it or believes that you're not good enough for it, then working with that part of yourself and trying to work with the internal stuff before you start to try and change all this external stuff. Hey.
Absolutely, and that's probably going to throw a big call out there. In my experience, the number one cause of disease, two causes. One, two. Let's say two. Holding on to resentment towards self or other, and low self-esteem. They
Mm.
would have to be the biggest two causes of disease in the Western world today.
Yeah, totally. What comes to mind as you say that is, you alluded to it before, but just the idea of being stuck in the victim mentality, right? So when you are stuck in that victim mentality, it's always everyone else's fault. Oh, I got this from this person. This is because of my family. This is because of my community, yada yada. But I think if we can begin to take ownership, right, and just say that, you're responsible. Everyone's responsible for themselves.
Well, you have to take ownership because you're the single point of attraction perceiving it.
Mm.
So no one can hurt you without your permission.
Yeah.
On any level. So it always comes back to the person in the mirror.
For sure. And that's quite empowering, I think, when you do come to that stage of acceptance that you are creating your own reality. You're attracting all these experiences in your life for a reason because of yourself and your own conditioning. I think that's quite empowering when you can step into it and say, well, actually, now I get to create something new. Now I get to create something different in my life, in the world.
We can create whatever we want and whatever we don't want. We have that power. And paradoxically, a lot of people say they want empowerment, but when they have it, they feel overwhelmed with it because they don't know where to start, which comes back to the clarity thing. So all these little pieces that, we're conditioned to think that way, but in reality, human beings are designed to be more that than more linear. So, yeah.
Cool. What a powerful place to start the podcast, mate. That's could just go back and re-listen to the first 12 minutes a few times, I think, and that would definitely help. So, Matt, when it comes to physical training, essentially we want health as the baseline, right? We want to be healthy, because the more healthy that we are, the more we can recover from the stress we're putting ourselves under through exercise. And I suppose that then dictates, if we're working out or if we're working in. But how does someone know essentially if they're at baseline health or if they're not?
Well, essentially, there's a couple of easy ways to tell. Firstly, you should wake up feeling refreshed and energized without the high weight of the world on your shoulders. So your baseline energy for the day, I tell people, if your energy on the particular day is 5 out of 10, then and you're kind of scheduled to do a workout that day, just work at 50% capacity for that day. 6 out of 10, 60% up and down the scale. That's probably the easiest, quickest way to tell if you're ready to work out. There's some more elaborate kind of baseline healths, like heart rate is one of them. I tell people to take their pulse at the carotid artery for a minute the second they wake up, and then you get an average over a workout week, which could be 4 days, 6, 7, whatever. And let's say your resting heart rate is 60. Then on a scheduling training day, your heart rate for that day is 63. Well, then you need to be really, really careful because you're entering into fatigue. If it's 64, then you've got fatigue. So you've got to cut your entire volume in half. If it's 65 or more, then you're not training that day. You're light yoga, some mobilisations, some stretching, go for just a light walk, and that's all you're doing. Because your body has to work harder just to keep you alive. You don't need to throw a workout in after that. But the more that happens, the less healthy you are. The more stressed you are, the less capacity for exercise you actually have. So what people don't really realise is that all the stress of life summates into one big kind of backpack. All the physical, mental, emotional, spiritual stress that we carry. The spiritual stress, for example, could be you're doing something but you know you shouldn't. A mental stress could be an argument you had with someone. An emotional stress could be you feel guilt about something for whatever reason, as an example. And a physical stress can be anything from kicking your toe, breaking your leg, spraining your ankle, eating a Big Mac, etc., or not recovering from the last workout. All these things summate, and we put that in our backpack and carry that around with us all day, every day. So we don't need, and often that backpack's heavier than anything in the gym anyway. So the more that happens, the likely less healthy someone is. So there's some really easy ways to tell. And there's other
Mm-hmm.
as well, continual aches and pains, um, fatigue, pain. Your mood plays a big part. Someone who's really irritable. Um, if you're just generally feeling down, that's generally not a great sign of health. But also being too wound up as well. Even that's got a decent bit of leeway attached to it. But if it's kind of out of character for you, then there's something going on, and that needs to be addressed arguably before your squat session, because you're carrying that weight before you put the bar on your back or your front or whatever you're doing with it. So there's some really, it can get kind of more clinical than that, but generally for the general population, that's some easy tips there.
Yeah, that's awesome. What came to mind as you talking about some of those things is, what we mentioned. I think in the last podcast, we're talking about that idea of common versus normal,
Mm.
and it's common, for example, like you're saying, for everyone, well, not everyone, but a large percentage of the population to wake up tired and poor energy throughout the day and relying on caffeine to get through the day and aches and pains, all
Mm.
this sort of stuff. But just because it's common and we're talking about it as if, oh, cool, everyone's got it, it must be a normal part of life or a normal part of aging. It's not necessarily like an optimal thing, is it?
Far from optimal. It's not
Mm.
not normal to be sore for 4 days.
Yeah.
2 days, sure. If you've done something new and a heavy session, fair enough. But then if it gets prolonged and your sleep gets affected and then your mood gets affected and then you start relating to people not in a way that feels good to anyone, that just builds up, builds up, builds up. And it is common for a lot of people. And unfortunately, that's how a lot of people live their entire life, not
Mm.
really knowing any better. They think it's a medication deficiency
Mm.
and not really saying, well, okay, how stressed am I? How much pressure am I under at work? What does my partner expect of me? How are the kids being? What have I eaten? How hydrated am I? Really simple questions that we don't really get taught at school, funnily enough, how to be a human. We get taught how all this other shit. But yeah, that's the next podcast. That one.
That's the next one, mate. Yeah. Like coming back to those foundation health principles, right? Like I always used to, like, when I was working with a lot of people for more rehab based stuff, just tell everyone, just read the book How to Eat, Move and Be Healthy by Paul Chek. And that's probably going to solve half your problems. Like, um, yeah, I think the other common thing that comes up as well, a lot of people talk about the genetics thing, but we know, really genetic diseases account for what, like less than 5% of all total disease,
Yep,
right?
3 to 5% last time I looked it up.
Yeah. So it's a pretty small percentage. So to blame your genetics and not look at your diet, lifestyle, mental, emotional factors, to not look at that stuff, it's like you're missing something. You're
There's
missing something
also a
big, right?
95% chance that you're not going to express your genetic weaknesses. And the number one deciding factor, really, for 99.99% of people is your diet and lifestyle.
Mm.
We all have a genetic something, but then we can either express that or suppress it without the way we live life. It's as simple as that. So I've had many people come in the clinic and say, I've got knee pain because my nan had knee pain.
Yeah.
Sure. So
Nothing to do with sitting for 12 hours a day.
that's pointing the finger, right?
Yeah.
They're not owning
Yeah.
their knees.
Yeah. And I suppose it goes back to what we were just talking about, right? Like, victim mentality versus
Yeah.
ownership, accepting even if you do have a genetic weakness, like you said, like we all do, we all have some kind of genetic weakness, but it's just owning that and being aware of that, I think, is good. And then, knowing how to better manage yourself day to day, so that you don't express those genetic weaknesses.
Absolutely, yeah.
Mm. So, Matt, we know that movement is a part of life. We all move, even from the foundational, excuse me, foundational things of breathing and that sort of stuff. But we move in the womb through infant development
Mm-hmm.
into, being on our feet and then getting into the gym, strength and conditioning. Um, if we could talk a little bit about the importance of that infant development process, because I think in the rehabilitation world it is extremely overlooked, and it is an extremely useful thing to revisit. But yeah, if we could talk about the importance of that, and then perhaps even some of the mental emotional correlations that come along with going through or missing key stages of infant development.
So when you say it's overlooked, I don't think that's even the term. It's not even acknowledged, really.
Mm.
Um, Physios and chiropractors I speak to haven't even heard of it. But when you explain the concept, they kind of, well, that makes sense. So infant development was based on Dr. Voiter's work, and Paul CHEK unknowingly developed all these exercises that when he did Voiter's training, there was a huge overlap and correlation to work. So it was kind of more for him a correlation and confirmation of what he was doing. But with infant development, you can, first of all, when you watch someone move the way they move, you can see where they skipped certain developmental stages. So we're in the womb and we're wriggling around and kind of doing stuff. That's where we develop our twist movement and our cellular radiation. So that's where we kind of learn the mechanics of the breath, but we don't practice the mechanics of the breath till we're in a field of gravity, i.e., born. When we're in a naval radiation phase, where typically the first sort of 3-ish, there's no kind of line in the sand, the first, say, 3 months is where the infant's just wriggling around on the ground, not really going anywhere, but yet still kind of managing to shuffle along. And all the movement is coming from the core. All the movement's radiating from the navel. So if we skip that stage, then all the other stages have been kind of stunted, if you will. Then we go into a pre-spinal phase where we manage to somehow get our toes in our mouth and all these contorted positions that most adults, myself included, probably couldn't get into today. And then we go into a spinal phase where we all of a sudden we're on our back, and then we manage to come onto our front. Now our entire world is what we've known so far in the first couple of months of our life is now upside down, which is the right way up, ironically. And that's where we start to kind of do um, this innate drive to start moving. And what we actually have is acupressure points all over the spine, all over the hands, the forearms, the arms, the legs. And we first start kind of wriggling along in more of a serpentine type kind of movement. And that's where we get our lateral movement from. So then we start developing these movement patterns. But when we first start lifting our head up, we start a homologous phase of infant development, which is really the body starting to integrate upper and lower hemispheres neurologically. I should say before that, we do what's called the pre-spinal phase, which is, as an adult, we call it the inchworm exercise, which is probably the most powerful / dangerous exercise. I'll get back to that in a sec. To give someone, and that really integrates the head and the tail as limbs for the first time. Then we go into the tummy phase. We lift up our head. We start kind of coming up on hands and knees and start rocking back and forward. That's our homologous, which is the upper and lower hemispheres of the body. Then we start crawling kind of like a lizard, which integrates the left and right hemispheres of the body. Then we get up on our hands and knees and start crawling like a cat or a dog, which then integrates the cross crawl, which is, say, left shoulder, right hip, and vice versa. And the combination of these really integrates neurologically the system that we call movement and the proper sequence patterns that starts differentiating different muscles of the shoulder, the neck, the hip, the trunk, legs as tonic and phasic. So certain muscles have more tonic fibers, some have more phasic fibers. Tonic have more of a postural role, the phasic have more of a movement role. So they start to get differentiated. Now, when we go through this particular pattern, we are then able to reach out to something, which is the brachiation phase. This is where we become more mammalian like. Now, when we stand up on 2 feet and become bipedal, that is when the neocortical part of the brain comes online, and that's what makes us uniquely human. Now, think of all that sequence in that order. Now, think of the sequence of evolution that I guess, that's winning the scientific race at the moment. We started in the ocean, the womb. We then go on to land, crawling like a lizard or a snake first. Then we grew legs and it was a lizard. And then it kind of went off there. But after a lizard, then we turned into a mammal, crawling on all fours. And then we reached out to stuff like the, what are they called?
Chimps.
Chibs, thank you.
Yeah.
And so we relive our biological evolution every single time we're born, which is pretty remarkable when you think about it. And then going through this phase also sets us up mentally, emotionally, because when we start crawling, we have acupressure points on the inside of our calf, inner thigh, and inner parts of our forearm and hands. When we start crawling like a lizard, or the reptilian crawl phase, where we get more lateral serpentine movement, then that connects to the limbic system of the brain. So we're setting up, it connects to our not limbic system, the medulla and the pons of the brain, which is our survival instinct part of the brain. So when you think about what a lizard can compute, it's basically safety, sustenance, and sex. That's pretty much it. That's 90% of their cerebral capacity. So we're building that software every time we crawl. We're setting that foundation up. When we start crawling like a mammal on our hands and feet, on our hands and knees, then the acupressure points in our hands and our knees connect to the limbic brain, our emotional brain. Then it's the more we crawl, the more those wires start interconnecting and start talking to each other. And then when we come up into bipedalism, and then acupressure points on the bottom of our feet talk to the neocortical part of the brain. Now, if someone has, let's say, they don't feel safe, or they might even be constipated, you can take that right back to the reptilian phase every time, because the reptilian phase in the medulla, the pons, etc., that is our autonomic regulation part of the brain. It's our breathing, it's our digestion, everything we do subconsciously. And the subconscious mind and brain doesn't know how to lie either. That's an ego thing. Then someone comes with an emotional disorder or dysfunction. You can trace that right back to crawling early on, because those neural networks weren't set up to handle humanism, if that's a word. And then, so you can trace all of these things right back to when an infant did or didn't crawl. And the way that shapes movement growing up, if you didn't learn the correct neurological and physiological sequences as a child, you're not going to have it as an adult. So that's going to show up as all kinds of different dysfunctions. Now, if you're a rare case where you're an elite athlete and you're just amazingly genetically gifted in a given sport, but then you get injured, your neurology goes right back to that phase where you stopped developing as a child. So to rehab effectively, you need to take them back all the way and teach them how to crawl before they get to win an NRL grand finals.
Mm.
So it plays a huge part, and it is largely misunderstood and largely not really taught in most schooling. I'm assuming you didn't go through that in your uni, did you?
No, definitely not. I think the only people that I've really come across that outside of the, like, the CHEK world that are into it, I think a few of the Kairos are into it. They study, like, a lot of them study the DNS system out of Czech Republic, I think it is.
Mm.
But yeah, apart from that, I don't think most people are really into it.
Yeah.
But yeah, very powerful stuff, right? Like, I know, well, personally, you took me through it. Well, pretty much we went all the way through back infant development with myself, and it was like profound, like powerful. And as we're going through these different exercises, as you were just saying, I could feel a difference in my own emotional state
Yeah.
and emotional regulation, and the idea of just even, and it kind of makes sense, right? Like, if you have better stability, you're more grounded, like, metaphorically and physically.
Yeah.
So it's like I did experience all those shifts that you were talking about, which is really cool.
Yeah.
And I know also, like, I still do it a little bit now as a warm up. So before things like martial arts and that sort of stuff, I might do a bit of tummy crawling, like reptilian crawling into mammalian crawling. And when you do it, you get back up off the ground and you feel like a different person because, as you were saying, by crawling, you're integrating the two hemispheres of the brain, right? You're getting a better integration of those two hemispheres.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it does. I think it also makes an amazing warm up before your training session as well.
Yeah. Well, you get a client to do it, and when they stand up, it's like there's someone home now behind.
Yeah.
And it's I remember how screwed up you were, and and then afterwards we could have a decent conversation, and then you could actually handle my tangents at the time. So
yeah,
very grateful for that.
Yeah, it's amazing. So yeah, super important part of rehab performance, and like you said, for emotional self management as well. So,
and it's fun.
So
it looks cool.
Yes, absolutely. So Matt, we know things like assessment, and we talked a little bit about goal setting. That's really important for the basis of a physical conditioning program or physical, conditioning / rehabilitative program. So I suppose, things that are commonly overlooked as well is sort of, seeing where the person's at relative to where they need to be. So not just things like, yeah, we know that most people, for example, they'll get better performance if they get a bit stronger, but we know purely strength is not always the answer. Yeah, so maybe if we could just have a bit of a chat around, like, the importance of assessment, so we figure out, well, exactly what needs stretching, exactly what needs the most strengthening, where do we need to bias our programming, where is the person deficient within their biomotor abilities relative to where they need to be at.
Well, I mean, if we just stretch everything and strengthen everything without really making it specific to the person, we're not really achieving much, except we're going to exacerbate any imbalances that are there already. So most programs don't really have the holism that's required for that person. Now, when we're working with someone, we're not just working with a body. We're working with someone's physical, mental, emotional, spiritual evolution. Their entire story is being kind of displayed in front of us. Now, for that person that we're working with, here's a kind of a double-edged sword. Yes, we can go into the mental, emotional stuff, but from a physical point of view, that's the vehicle that's containing all of that. Now, if you can be ultra spiritual, ultra mental, emotional, etc., but if you don't have the physical capacity to handle that, then it's probably not going to work out very well. So the physical correction of the body is just as important as all the other stuff. Now, we assess, because, we want to know what we're going to do with this person. And I can just look up at a YouTube clip and, yep, okay, you can do that for today. What am I really doing? You want to pay someone to do that? I wouldn't. I'd want to be, combed over with a fine comb and cross the T's and dot the I's and all that kind of stuff. If a certain person just wants a program for the sake of having a program, I will tell them to go to someone else because that's not what I do. But we assess because we want to know what joints are working, what joints aren't working, which ones are moving, which ones aren't. What's that nerve doing? Why isn't that have as much tone as that side? Why is that side tighter than that side? What's that doing that that's not? All these little things, all these little breadcrumb trails that we need to essentially follow and find out to see why they actually came to you in the first place. Now, the client might not know. They've just heard of you and want to train with you. But there's always something a bit deeper going on. So why are they attracted to work with me? And then working with people is really cool because you get to kind of learn their story. And not in a judgmental way at all, but it's just you've got a whole universe of a person there. So what's this person bringing into my experience? And working with the physical body, of course, you want to iron out all the weak links first. It could be core, it could be legs, it could be back, it could be neck, whatever it is. You work on that first to bring them into holism as well. And then the healthier, stronger someone is, the more fun you get to have with them. Because then you can all but throw everything at them and they can handle it. But not only handle it in the gym, but they can also handle that in their own life as well. They can pick up their kids, they can run with their dog or whatever they're doing. And you're not going to get it right every time. You're not going to get it perfect either because the body's too dynamic to be perfect. And where's the fun in that? So there's always areas to improve. You strengthen one thing. If you go a little bit too far, then something else is going to get weak relative to that. So it's a never-ending game of it all. But as a trainer, as a coach, therapist, the constant search for balance should always sort of be there. And not being dogmatic about the time and being perfect is very helpful as well, which I had to learn the hard way.
Yeah. And again, I think it's as you said, right? Assessment is super important. It's a bit of a paradox. I think I've heard Paul say this before. You think about people like physios and chiros. Yeah, they're doing really low level, exercise with people, little stability exercises, little pink dumbbells and little therabands, that sort of stuff. Yeah, they have the most education out of most health and fitness professionals. But paradoxically, you've got a lot of PTs, and again, not trash talking PTs because I think there's a lot of great ones out there. But just due to the lack of education, they're loading up people with hundreds of kilos on the barbell. So paradoxically, they should have the most degree of education out of everyone, right?
But they also spend the most amount of time with the person as well. So they should. PTs should be trained the same as physios and arguably psychologists as well.
Yeah.
Someone with an injury, and what they say between sets is really a self-diagnosis if you're paying attention.
Yeah, 100%. I think anyone that's ever done a bit of PT in the past understands that. Huge degree of psychology and behavior change, right? Why doesn't someone change the diet? Why does someone keep self-sabotaging? Whatever reason it may be, why aren't they making the change? Well, that's a deeper rooted psychological thing to look at there.
Which is there for everyone. And it really depends on what capacity you want to work with someone. And if you just want to work with the physical body, that's totally fine. It's just, the body tells a story and you've just got to learn to read it and listen to it, really. But yeah, you're right. PT should be educated far more than they are. I don't know what the PT certification is now. I think when I did it was about 2 years or something. If that, I can't remember. But I'm sure there's a weekend course you can do now with that. And yeah, it's yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to say. Like, I don't know, exactly how it's changing right now. I
Mm.
think there's definitely a lot of great people out there, that are providing education for PTs. People, even people like Paul, obviously,
Mm.
amazing education out there. Yeah, I think it's just a matter of the individual, right? Like they have to want to choose that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm. So Matt, when it comes to the idea of inner and outer unit integration of the body in terms of the inner unit muscles, outer unit muscles, again, that's another commonly sort of missed or confused area, um, particularly for things like around the inner unit of the core and the low back and back pain and things like that.
Mhm.
So maybe if we could have a brief chat around like potentially testing and knowing if your inner unit muscles are actually working, or why we may have to work on them after things like pain.
Mhm.
And then how do we go about integrating that into, the foundation movement patterns such as a squat or a deadlift?
Usually, if the inner unit muscles aren't working, you are in pain.
Mm,
Unless you've been hit in a tackle or an accident or something like that, where there's been a physical impact. 85% of pain's idiopathic, so of unknown origin. So if you've gone bend down to pick up a sample, then your back gives way, then there's a good chance your inner unit isn't really firing. The inner unit's largely misunderstood. I found some PTs have half an idea, but then they call sit ups and planking. That's their kind of go to. Physios have an understanding of the anatomy, but not the function, or maybe just the pelvic floor. They like to kind of just hang out with the pelvic floor, and that's about it. Um, Chiropractors very hit and miss with them, and same with osteos. And it's not their fault. It's just they don't get taught that stuff. They've got degrees in anatomy, but that kind of stops there. The inner unit is really it's a multi-layered thing. It's not just that's the core. The,
mm.
the diaphragm, the main breathing muscle, never stops working ever. If it does, then you're not here. Uh, got the multifidus, which is an intrinsic stabilizer of the lower back. It goes from the sacrum all the way up to the head, so the head has to be included in the core as well. You've got the anterior fibers of the internal oblique. You've got the TRA, which used to be the TVA, but in literature it's now TRA, the transverse abdominis. And you've also got the pelvic floor, which is made up of 22 to 24 muscles as well. So people think the core is just the rectus Chuck Norris down the front, but that's not even considered core, really, especially inner unit core.
Mm,
So when these muscles um, co-contract, so when you breathe in through the diaphragm pushes down, pelvic floor kind of comes up, and that creates a non-compressible cylinder, which is like a corset around the spine, which is there to protect your spine. Now, in my experience, I think there's arguably three main things that affect the core as a direct function, which will be no real particular order: breath, inverted breathing patterns, diet, and stress. Now, the biggest, what's the word I'm after? The unsung heroes for the core are actually the organs, because the nerves that innervate the core first feed the organs. The blood supply to the core first supply the organs. If the organs of digestion are under any kind of stress or irritation, they will expand to become more permeable, because if they're any kind of itis, is fancy word for heat. Best thing to put out fire is water, so it becomes more permeable, allow more water in, so you get bloated and it pushes out into the abdominal wall, switching those muscles off. That's probably the biggest cause of a lack of core. So that comes back to diet and lifestyle. Um, the muscles of the head that keep the head in place, so all your, probably 20 muscles each side that hold the head where it is. So they have to be considered core as well. And most people, when they get rehabbed by a physio, PT, some chiros, it's primarily either just drawing in without consideration for the core, or sucking up as if you're holding in a wee. And that's pretty much it. Which has its, it'll get you so far. But to integrate it properly and to use it as it's functioning, you should be able to draw your core in right now and talk like we're talking right now.
Mm.
Listeners are doing that as I said that. This gets this. That's what core is. Now, when you brace, like I am now, you can hear what is happening. So I'm literally taking my own breath away doing that. Now, you need to be able to do that if you're lifting heavy. So there is a place for it, of course. So it's knowing the as and the when of the sequencing and what to do it. So Paul talks about isolation into integration. So what that means is finding the core muscle or muscles, or doesn't even have to be core, it can be something in the shoulder. Finding the muscle that isn't firing, getting that firing first, then integrating that into the sequence. Now, let's say it's a core muscle, because that's probably the most common. Now, in lower back pain, which I think 90% of people have today, or probably more, it's usually the lower part of the abdominal wall. In my experience, it's the first to fatigue, it's the last to recover, and it's probably the most difficult to recruit, especially if you're new to the whole exercise thing. Getting someone to rotate their pelvis back, they will turn on every single muscle they have in an attempt to do it. So, and again, it's not their fault, they've just never been taught how to do it. So let's say it's the lower abdominal, so you give them lower abdominal exercises. So in the CHEK system, we use, which I think Paul got it from Yonder and someone else, and then someone else, can't remember. But he got that and he kind of refined it to what it is today, what you know of it as. So you put the blood pressure cuff underneath belly button, which sits at L3. Then you put pressure contracting your lower abdominals. So at least the brain can say, okay, that's what that muscle's doing. When that brain and the muscle communication becomes so efficient that it becomes subconsciously competent, that's when you can go into a field of gravity and stabilize your own spine. Now, to do that into deadlift, there's a certain sequence of exercises. Let's say you can go from lower abdominal, the series 1 to 4. Then you can go into hip extension on ball. Then maybe a kneeling bend pattern, maybe a seated pattern, a standing pattern. Then you can add weight when all the guys are doing the right job at the right time. Then you can add weight to the deadlift and so on and so forth. Not as simple as that, but it's kind of simple as that. So by the time you deadlift, you've got outer unit recruitment as well. The outer unit's all the muscles you see in the mirror, typically.
Yeah, and as you were saying, we kind of hit that. We want the inner unit obviously to be firing automatically and that sort of stuff. But as we hit that threshold that the weight gets heavy enough, we can expect all these outer unit muscles to switch on. And we kind of need them, right? If we want to lift heavy.
If we want to go beast mode, yeah, that's required.
Beast modus, yeah. Yeah, that's cool. Quite a few things come up for me then as you were talking. I think one of the things was the idea of, you said, if, for example, in a certain pattern, one or two key muscles are not firing, we need to isolate them first. So are you thinking about that, Matt, from more like a fascial lines sort of perspective? So if, for example, the groin isn't switching on because it's been injured or something like that, then that'll have its flow and effect potentially up to the opposite shoulder and things like that?
I mean, fascially, for me, yeah. Fascially, it's also just the mechanics of the body. Like I guess the fascia is the kind of the connecting link there. But I'm also thinking spinal mechanics as well, joint mechanics. I mean, it all plays into the same thing. It all has its sort of. It's like the body is an orchestra, so you've got to see if
Mm.
the musician isn't playing the right note, and it could be something in the toe affecting the shoulder. It can be something. It could be your eye affecting your calf, as an example. So it's all an orchestra, and we just have to first assess to see which musician isn't playing the right tune. Sometimes they're playing a completely different instrument, and got to teach them how to play.
Yeah, nice. I love that analogy. That's cool. The other thing that come up for me as you were speaking about the inner unit was, the idea of like the organs, right? Like, and we know that things like digestive complaints and that sort of stuff are pretty rampant. But yeah, I know for myself, and anyone can try this if they know they have certain foods, for example, that irritate them or bloat them. Wait until you're all bloated, and then try and if you know how to, switch on that inner unit and engage those deeper muscles. And it just doesn't really happen.
At worst, well, at best, it's a lot harder to get to happen.
Yeah,
Yeah. It just feels uncomfortable.
yeah. That's right, and kind of like as you were saying as well, that muscle mind connection,
Mm,
it's a lot harder for the nervous system to feel it and switch it on, right?
mm, yeah.
Mm,
Uh,
yeah,
the better memory you have prior to that incident, the better. But then if you're brand new to the whole kind of movement, gym recruitment, turning on call thing, then you it's likely never happened before. So think about what your body went through prior to that point to keep you functioning. It comes back to the subconscious, just keep wired to keep you alive, and the things that it does to keep you going is just beyond our comprehension, really. So you should bow down to that as well.
yeah, yeah. It's a pretty impressive vessel that we're in, right? Like, you think to orchestrate what hundreds of thousands or millions of chemical reactions every second, repair cells, build hormones, move you, allow you to think. Like, it's pretty impressive.
I mean, we should just in general just bow down to nature, at the gift that we've been given, and that's even without knowing any anatomy. It's
Mm.
mind-boggling.
Yeah, it's impressive. So Matt, when it comes to structuring our sessions, so what do you think makes a good session in terms of warm up? The idea of stretching again, like we talked about, a lot of people, some people don't stretch. You got the extreme camps, right? Don't stretch. Oh, you should do dynamic only, or all these different ideas, and then our mobilisations into our, if we're up for it, our strength and hypertrophy sort of aspects of the session. So how do you sort of believe that we should structure the session ideally?
I mean, ideally, I wish I had a better answer, but ideally, you need to give the client what they need at the time. And that can be literally anything from crossfitting someone half to death to having a chat. The amount of times when I worked in fitness first, I'd, have my afternoon shift and I had program A and B ready to go, expecting they did A or B the day before. So we would do the whatever they didn't do that day. They would come up the stairs. One eye went that way, one eye went over there. They had 25 minutes sleep. They've eaten absolute shit. Argument with their kids, their partner, their boss, whoever, and they just weren't even in their body. So I'm not going to give that person a workout. If there's any workout, I'm going to give that person. I'm going to get them to play on the ball and just wriggle around on the ground, or get them to do, let's say, a deadlift pattern with the bar, um, 2 sets of 50, and just have a chat with them and just get them to go through the motion with it. If they are in their body and on planet Earth for that workout space time, then it depends how long I've got them for. I would always usually start, depending on the person, obviously, a few corrective stretches, mobilisations, If I don't have a lot of time with them, they can do that on their own, and I've already shown them how to do that. If I am with them doing that, then I like to tweak it just every little bit of time, not only to make it, I want to make it as specific as possible for the client, but also keep it kind of fresh for the client as well. I want them to walk away, oh yeah, I didn't know I could do that, but yeah, that makes feel a bit different. So I've given them some information. We go through the workout, and I want to progress the workout. It doesn't have to be by much. It can be by an extra set, an extra rep, a little bit more weight, whatever it is, or adding a bit more complexity to whatever exercise. That gives them a sense of achievement. I'm getting information back, say, okay, well, I know they can do this. Maybe I need to distract them. Maybe I need to pump their ego up, whatever. And then I want them to really leave the gym with the same heart rate they had. I don't want them to fall down the stairs because I've given them 10 sets of squats. Too much paperwork involved with that. So I want them to feel like they've done something, but not that they need to go home and have a nap. So
Yeah, cool.
it's the science and the art. The science is the sets, the reps, the tempo, etc. But the art is knowing how much to give them at the time, and just reading your client, getting to know them on that level, that non-verbal kind of level, and really, as Paul said, you tell them what they want to hear, but you give them what they need at the time, which can vary that much. It's you've just got to be ready for everything, and I learned that very, very early on. So I wish I had a better answer for you, but yeah, I'm not good at giving those straight answers. I must.
No, your speciality. No, that's cool, right? Like we talked about, the human experience is not that linear, straightforward. Zeros and ones. It's a bit more dynamic than that. But yeah, I remember in the gym that I was working at last. We used to talk a lot about the idea of optimal versus practical. And it sort of aligns with what you just said, because the optimal is maybe they're in there 4 times a week doing their sessions, and each session's a brilliant session, but we know that that's not always practical for the person based on any number of factors, right? Like you said, from poor sleep through to emotional stress. They haven't eaten all day, which is a really kind of common one. It's people skipping lunch and that sort of stuff for work. And yeah, so just to be a little bit flexible in our approach, I think is important. And like you said, that's the art of it, right?
Yep.
So Matt, we'll talk a little bit about, if we can. Again, this is probably an it depends answer as well.
I'm gonna.
But
I'm gonna.
hey, say again, mate.
I'm gonna be good with this one.
Yeah. But the idea of like planes of movement, stability demands, how much rotational stuff we're doing in our training, unilateral versus bilateral movements, all those sort of like smaller things that we could change within a program, or different aspects we could put into a program. Do you think everyone should do some degree of multiple plane of motion, unilateral, bilateral stuff, or do you think it's more specific to their demands for sport or activity?
Yes.
Yes.
So yes, it should be tailored to their work and or sport, or even their general home life. But also, I want to give them as much variety as possible. Every plane of movement, within their program, as in their program could contain program A, B, C, or A and B, whatever it is. I want a bit of everything in every program. Open chain, closed chain, all that kind of stuff. I want every primal pattern, every plane of movement, whatever they can get away with. That's what they're doing. So sometimes
Cool.
start that inverted. Sometimes you need to finish the other way, and it's always different. So
Yeah.
with that one.
Yeah. What comes to mind there is I remember watching an interview with with Charles Poliquin years ago, and he talked about the idea of training as, I think he gave the analogy of speaking a language, right? So you want to build your vocabulary, which is essentially what you said. We want to be able to do a wide variety of planes of motion. We want to be masters of different types of all the movement patterns, but then variations on those movement patterns as well. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, cool. So Matt, when it comes to things like building strength versus hypertrophy, we know there's a range of, like an optimal rep scheme, set scheme, that sort of stuff, time under tension. Um, how do you believe that we should sort of periodize that effectively? Do you think we can do both in the one session or the 1 week? Or do you like more a sort of block periodization style where you're doing a strength phase and then maybe into more of a hypertrophy phase after that, or vice versa?
Well, you go into, Paul's success formula, the flexibility, stability, strength, power. And that's how I would generally kind of approach that. And there is no real linear time period. You can have your kind of set goals of I want to get them to strength by this point, but due to 1,000 different reasons, you haven't got there yet, or maybe you got there quicker. You never really know. But to get to strength, I really want to iron out all the imbalances first before I start really loading them up. And I want to make sure, first of all, they're strong enough to handle the potential power work we're about to do as well, which is typically, I think from research, if you're doing a box jump, for example, if you're jumping off the box, to handle the extrinsic load going through the spine, you need to be able to front squat your body weight. I think it's 6 times. Now, if you're on a par 5 on the tee, hitting the ball as far as you possibly can, the load going through your spine is your equivalent to your 4 RM in the gym. So I want to make sure all of that stuff is ironed out, because I know my client's going to be doing that stuff in the background anyway. So with periodization, it's a tricky one, because if they've come to me from rehab first, which most people have, then it's more of initially it's kind of more of a linear, then it goes more to undulating, and then it really depends on how they respond to that. I love relative strength training. That's kind of my. I did a lot of stuff with Polkin with relative strength and had really good success with it. So that's kind of my personal style. I'm more of a take bits of that person, bits from that, bits from there, and kind of pull them together into. I mean, you've had a treatment with me. It's not really the same. It's bits of everything. You can't really call it that. And that's how I kind of do the training as well. So like, this person could do German volume training now. This person would be better off with some plyometric stuff. That's all kind of different. And I'm always policing how they're responding. And I've got to keep that in accordance to their goals and not mine. Because often I want them to be, lean and strong and have my ideals of what I want them to be and look like. But they just might have a completely different view. So that's when my sales pitch has to be really good. But yeah, there's a lot of variables. But that if I had a approach, that'd probably be it.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. And like you said, you never really know how someone's going to respond to a certain training modality, or like along that um, velocity or rep spectrum. You don't know how they're going to respond until they do it, right?
Yeah.
So then, you might have an idea of how they're going to respond, but then it's like you said, you have to watch them, monitor them, and see how they go. Like some people could do strength training year round, probably, and not get burnt out or not get tired. But for someone like me, I do like 3 weeks of strength, and I'm like, fuck, oh, I need a little break now.
Break.
Yeah. So I suppose that kind of takes us into the topic of deloading as well. And again, I know it's a very, very individual thing,
Mm.
But the concept of deloading, do you like to cut everything down? So like volume, cut down intensity, cut it all down, or do you have a preference?
I probably wouldn't cut down intensity, just volume.
Mm.
I don't want them to lose that, I guess, that neural drive that the intensity requires. But we can kind of taper it off a little bit. So I'm more of a devolumer than a de-intensifier, for sure.
Yeah,
But
cool,
both
cool.
ways work. It depends on the person, as obviously. But my personal style, I prefer them to get that hormonal response with keeping the intensity up, but just cutting the volume in half with reps and sets and all kinds of stuff. Maybe even giving them longer rest as well.
Okay, yeah, cool, cool. Yeah, I think again, like it's just that fundamental program design stuff, right? Like it's so important, understanding the tempos, time under tension, yeah, rep set schemes. I think it's foundational for everyone to sort of, any trainer or coach out there to really have their head around.
Well, to know what you're doing, it's kind of essential.
Mm.
And yeah, it's one of those things that you're certainly not gonna lose by knowing it. That's for sure. And I took me a good 2 years to get my head around the time under tension thing. But when I did, everything just fell straight into place. And for the first time in my PT career, I actually felt like I knew what I was doing. And that was after doing exercise coach back in the day. And
Mm.
just when it clicks, though, it clicks. And then you can run with it from there. So it's you need the science and you need the art. You need the both, because typically the art will come from experience. You need to know the numbers. You need to know the science of it, for sure.
Yeah, yeah, it's an incredible blend of those two.
Mm.
Matt, we talked a little bit earlier about the idea of stress, and then we know things are inherently stressful. Like, for example, if you have a shit night worth of sleep, like that's going to affect you physiologically, or if you have a gut issue, or like a physical, like a low back injury, that's going to affect you. But how much do you see people's stress issues linked into their perception of what it is that they're perceiving to be stressful?
100%.
Mm.
That Yeah, everyone. I don't think I've ever met anyone who was stressed. Maybe one person that was the equivalent of the Dalai Lama or something up there. Um, yeah, you can see where people are at in their own, you'd say, conscious development and own evolution. Sorry, the sun's coming right at the perfect angle. Yeah, everyone.
Yeah. And do you see issues of stress per se? Like, everyone talks about managing my stress better. So do you believe it's more an issue of perception versus, obviously we need foundation health principles, right? We need to sleep well, hydrated, good food, all that sort of stuff. We need to move our bodies. But do you think that the perception of it is more important to look at than the actual physicality of doing those
Yeah,
things?
physicality gives you the capacity to handle the stress, but it's the perception that computes the stress. So without the perception, you wouldn't know that there's stress. But it's because of the perception gives you the experience of the reality that you're having. Now,
Mm.
working for you or not, then that's up to you as an individual. But your perception equals reality. But your perception is, if perception is the roof of the house, the walls are made up of your internal, external environment. So, which goes into your physicality, the diet, all that kind of stuff. Then your external environment, your relationships, your negative, positive input from everyone else's judgments and ideas, and how that affects you. And the concrete slab of the house is your conditioned beliefs, which is what we get, I guess, ultimately taught as kids, because we get taught all kinds of things as kids, and we're a little sponge as we're children. We need to learn how to survive. And the the problem with that, the other side of the coin, is when we're born, we're typically born into a theta brainwave, which is hypnosis, which we all but literally wear everything that we've been taught. So if we get taught we're going to burn in hell for doing this, then that becomes our core wiring within our psyche, and that through that wiring, that shapes our perception of that particular person, place, thing. And to the degree we don't eat well, hydrate, sleep well, breathe, move, etc., then we don't have the capacity to buffer that. And then we go into a state of disease, which is dis-ease. Not necessarily you don't get cancer straight away, but it really weakens our foundation to be able to handle that. Now, the average person, we're designed to handle about 90 minutes to 2 hours of stress a day. Western world really isn't conducive to that. You know, from the second we wake up to the second we go to bed, we're stressed. And, you know, with the stress, there's good and there's a bad. Like you could have a psychological stress, but it might be a problem-solving one, which is kind of really engaging and challenging, and you're finding that kind of nourishing to you. But then on the other hand, there could be the opposite of that, which I can't think of, which could paradoxically be that, ironically. So the stress is the perception, and our perception is very individualized, and it's really, it ultimately comes down to how congruent with yourself you are, because any stress that you perceive is really a mismatch between you and you. And I might say something to you that stresses you out, but that's really either me projecting my crap onto you, and then you saying, oh, this is the should be, could be, would be, but that doesn't resonate with me. And to the degree you engage in that, that's going to create stress for you. And then if I feel guilty about doing that, then it's the same thing happening sort of to me. But then you realize kind of we're all in it together. We're all here to support each other. We're all here to live, love, and learn together. But it takes quite a evolved mindset to get to there, because we're really conditioned to be here and worry about the money and the house and what we don't have and what we want and all this kind of stuff. So, I mean, how deep do you want me to go with the stress thing? How much time?
Yeah, we can keep chatting, mate. I think what you've said so far is pretty cool, right? Like, because it is an invitation to, well, as you said, it is an invitation to start to step onto the quote unquote spiritual path, where you're really looking at your own beliefs and your own behaviors and your own, you're looking at the consciousness with which you're creating your own life.
Plugging
So,
your.
what's that, mate? You got a battery? Chucking the charger in?
Yeah, better,
Yeah,
better keep it there now. That's the trick.
yeah,
Stay there.
that's cool. Yeah, well, I think it's important to look at, right? Because in any area of our lives, if we can honestly look at our own beliefs and ask the question, is this really working for me?
Mm.
Then we can start to make change in our lives. But in my opinion, until we're willing to truly look at the beliefs and the thoughts that we have about ourselves and about the world, nothing really changes.
No, it doesn't. And but that comes from us not changing, right? Just as you said, I just said it in a different way. And if we stay on that path of not really changing, then we're going to continually to unconsciously attract different catalysts into our experience to kind of at one point force the change. And which leads to pain. Pain means do something different, and no pill is going to get rid of unresolved issues within the psyche. And with that said, it takes a pretty brave person to sit in their shit. And on the other side of that, a lot of people aren't ready to give up their shit. So they're just happy in their own little weird hamster wheel of life. And if that's happy for them, I don't have a problem with it personally. It's when it causes problems, that's when we need to have some honest adult discussions.
Yeah, I think you touched on an important point just there. The belief, and this is a common thing I think with people that are coaches and people that are therapists. Are we coaching people, or are we trying to do have the unconscious agenda of trying to fix and save people? Right? Are we
Well, I mean,
trying to be that rescuer?
here's the thing with that: you can only work with someone to the level that you yourself have developed. That's what puts the limiting kind of factor on it. Once we get trainers, coaches, doctors, therapists who evolve themselves beyond the level of their patients, that's when we're going to see real healing and records being broken, and less one-hit wonders in the sporting world as well, for sure. It just takes commitment, it takes responsibility, it takes time, it takes knowledge to kind of master yourself on multiple levels. And you see the people who really achieve a high performance, not only in life but sport as well, who were the top of their game for a long time. These are people who mastered multiple aspects of their life, not just one. They didn't just set the world record for the bench press and then just disappeared into oblivion. They're the one-hit wonders. Someone who lost a lot of weight but then put it all back on again, they get forgotten about. But it's the people who lose 50 kilos and keep it off that inspire others to do the same. That's what high performance is. And that can be translated into business, parenting, sports, any area at all.
Yeah, yep, that's cool. It's as you said, right? Like people are taking that approach of they don't just want to be good at one thing, but the people that are good at the top of their game for a long time, um, like you're saying, they're almost forced to look at all the areas of their life, right? Because if you want to be good at anything for a long time, you do have to manage your stress and eat well and train your body and have all these sort of things going on, right? So it's like you're almost forced into it. And I suppose if you look at a lot of top performers, even people that are top performers in business, a lot of them look like athletes as well. So they manage themselves, they manage themselves quite well. And a lot of them have worked with a lot of their emotional stuff and all these sorts of things.
But they also continue to evolve themselves as they go. They don't just get to a certain point and think, okay, I've hit that, I'm done now. Put the feet up, pop a beer, and sit on the beach. You look at anyone who's successful in uh, any given field. They're continually evolving themselves. They're continually learning. There's like a never-ending thirst for knowledge, not only about their field, but relating fields and opposite fields. And how can I make this better and that better? How can I change myself to make that different? Or they're always pushing continually to just get really new and useful information, which is really based on the old Gnostic traditions prior to the formation of the Roman Catholic Church, which is an entire different podcast. I won't go into that. I'm trying not to go into that. So, I mean, again, like everything is a double-edged sword, right? So today we're exposed to as much information in one day that people living, I think it was 300 to 500 years ago, were exposed to in their entire lifetime. So when we have so much information coming in, information means in formation. There's too much information coming, it becomes chaotic. And look at how that presents itself in the body. Look at how that presents itself mentally, emotionally. Mental health through the roof. People, I think 9 people a day are taking their own life. There's prescription grubs. or drugs, whatever comes first. I mean, prescriptions sales have never been higher. And I think I read a statistic about 10 years ago that in the US alone, they spent $15 million a minute on healthcare drugs. So I can only imagine what that number is today. And given recent world events, depends if you want to get cancelled or not, Dan. We can go there. Yeah, it's just skyrocketed. And it's not really the people's fault. It's what we're conditioned to think and believe. So I wouldn't blame any one person. It's just the people in advertising and marketing are very good at what they do, and credit to them for that. I suppose that's technically high performance, isn't it? So you got to be fair with it. I'd go about it a bit different, as I'm sure you would too. But yeah, some people just get a bit confused along the way, and when you kind of bring it to its core, it takes spiritual kahunas to really follow your heart and to do what you genuinely feel called to do, because it can be very isolated from family and friends. It can take you in a completely different direction in life, and you know, it can be heartbreaking for some people to do it or not do it. So yeah, my big introduction to that was breaking off an engagement back in whatever year that was now, 2016. So yeah, a little while back, but that was my spiritual birth for sure.
Yeah, you touched on a lot of really important points there, and I think it does. Yeah, it does take a lot of guts, like you're saying, to truly listen to your heart. And I think, we all have that intuitive internal sense of knowing, am I or aren't I listening to my heart right now? Am I doing what I truly feel I should be doing? Or, like you said, am I doing what I've been conditioned to believe that I need to do by societal norms and things like that? But yeah, what sort of come up for me as you were speaking then was like just the importance of, again, tapping back into yourself, right? Because if you truly love and acknowledge and accept yourself for who you are, then it's probably not necessarily easy, but it's potentially a little bit easier to go on that path of following what it is that you truly want to do.
Well, that's would be arguably my definition of freedom. Is first of all, to get to that point, you have to let go of what everyone else thinks and says about you. 10 years ago, I would have had a very different response to that. And learning to do that, but also learning to step into that is completely different altogether. You might be married with kids and just started a new mortgage, or just moved into a house, and you get called to do something. What do you do? Ultimate ego versus soul battle going on there. And there's no right or wrong answer. It's most people I can hear saying already, well, you got to stay with your family and do stuff. I'm not going to get involved in that, but it's like it's one of those things where I was called in a particular direction, and I couldn't. It got so strong I couldn't deny it. I just couldn't, and it made me physically sick to continue on that path. And I'd be a very different person today. And today I like who I am, and I'd do it all over again if I had the chance. And was it fun? Absolutely not. But it made me a better coach, better therapist, gave me a lot more compassion for people who are struggling on that side of the fence as well, and allowed me to really see both sides of the coin of the polarity. So, yeah, tangent.
Yeah, that's cool. No, that's good. That's sort of touched on a couple other questions that I did have. Yeah, I think it's, and the more you listen to your soul, the more you've been doing it, the stronger it feels, right? The stronger it pulls you. into doing this. And I know even for myself, like going back to study now to do education because I feel called to get into working, educating young children.
Mm.
In which capacity, I don't know.
Mm.
But for example, for me, I felt so strongly pulled for that.
Mm.
Like, you've got to do this.
Mm.
It's like, okay, like it didn't really make sense that much in my mind,
Yeah,
but just going with it. And that's not an easy thing to start to develop, but nonetheless, it feels right. And I
yeah,
suppose when it feels right, you're on your sort of journey, quote unquote.
absolutely. But also listening to that, I mean, when your soul talks to you, it's often not what we'd call earth logic, right? It makes no sense to you at the time, but you just know you're getting called to do something. It's like your soul is literally trying to pull you out of your life and say, go do that. That's
Mm.
going to fill us up. Maybe we can come back to that, but that's our path. And it might not make any logical sense at the time. But when you have the guts to follow it, how much better does it feel?
Yeah, you feel aligned. Things seem to flow a lot more. It's like you're pushing. You're not pushing things uphill, right?
Mm.
Like things, yeah, you might. It's not going to be easy necessarily. Like nothing is that
No,
easy
but,
per se, but it's not like you're fighting every step of the way to make things happen. It's like things just flow. That's my experience of being on the soul path versus not being on the soul path.
plus, as well, when you follow it, it gives you that sense of, well, if I can leave that behind and chase that, whatever life's got, bring it.
Mm, mm. Cool. So, Matt, we talked about the idea, not necessarily the idea, but the importance of, things like your self acceptance, so truly accepting yourself, generating self love, self belief. And like you said, that self esteem, self belief is paramount. Um, do you have any sort of tips where people could start if they're struggling with low self esteem or lack of self belief? Do you have any tips for people how they can start to generate those things?
Yeah. Well, firstly, I'd always ask someone if they're ready to be esteemed, which might sound like a stupid question. And every time I ask this in a class setting, as an example, of course, all the hands go up straight away. And then I have to ask, well, if you're ready to be esteemed, that means all the rules of your life have to now change. How people talk to you, what you eat, how you dress potentially, what you're willing to tolerate, where your power goes, all that has to change, which is a huge shift just in itself. If I'm giving tips on self esteem, then who else is there to be esteemed than the person in the mirror? I mean, the fact that we've made it this far is an absolute miracle in itself. And every single cell in your body is responding to every single thought that you have, like you're God. And I mean, if that's not power, I don't know what is. I don't know if I'm supposed to swear or not.
You go for
Sweet.
it.
Well, um, I mean, think what it took to make you. It took an entire universe to make you. Now, some people might say, oh, that's rubbish and blah, blah, blah. Every single thing you can find in the universe, you can find in you. Absolutely everything. Now, we're made up of elements: earth, fire, um, air, water, space, right? Out of the 100 trillion cells, I can't remember the number, but there's X amount of atoms, right? And an atom is 99% space. So we're mostly space. We are a when you think about it, think about the moment here and now. Here and now comes and goes at the speed of infinity. You can't really react. Sorry, you can't really interact with infinity. So infinity has to be slowed down. The more it slows down, it becomes more dense. The more dense it becomes, the more that vibration kind of turns into a photon, an electron, etc., etc. But it slows down to a point where we can actually interact with it. Right now, we're just an embodied version of the entire universe. And if you really sit with that, what more power could you possibly have? Now, if you study quantum mechanics and quantum physics, it shows very clearly that any thought that you have or I causes a change in the entire universe the instant you have the thought. In other words, the entire universe is constantly changing, constantly modifiable by every single thought that you have. So, in other words, you create your universe. So, paradoxically, we have self-esteem whether we know it or not. It's whether we use it. And we can use it against ourselves, or we can use it for ourselves. I'm looking for a mic to drop.
Damn, yeah. I think we need one after that, mate. That was amazing. It was amazing. Yeah, coming back to realizing our power, right? Like not giving it away and yeah, as we talked about, like realizing that you're at the center, everyone's at the center of their own universe and you can create whatever it is that you want to create, whether you know you are creating it or not. So yeah, that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. I think, as you said, coming back just to appreciate the magnificence of what it takes to be here, having this experience now, and even dropping back into that wisdom of the body and just appreciating it. It can sort of take you out of the day to day mundane life problems that we can sometimes get stuck in.
Yeah, I mean, when some things I like to reflect on, when you've had a bit of a stressful day and you think everyone's an asshole and all that kind of stuff, when things just get a little bit much in the particular time. For me, my first go-to for some reason is just anatomy. So I think, what's making this tick? Now, in the human body, if you got every nerve fiber, nerve ending, and laid it end to end in a straight line, it would wrap around the earth 2.5 times. There's just under 100,000 kilometers worth of nerves just in our own body. With every nerve, there's a corresponding artery. And that takes form of the arteriovascular tree. And that's pumping 24/7, 365, just to keep you alive. And what did it cost you?
Yeah, not much.
Cost you nothing. Cost you maybe a soul handshake with someone. So just that alone, if you just think of what that is, then what you will find is either it's incomprehensible, which is even more magical, or if you just even think of just that itself, nothing else, then what you'll find is most of your problems will completely and utterly just go away. So first and foremost, they can't be that big of a problem, can they? But we tell ourselves out this story that we have to be X, Y, Z, A, B, C, whatever story says. And if we could just take a little bit of time each day to think, fuck, how cool is that? I get to breathe. And you might not even need to know how it works. Like, how does air keep me alive? This thing I can't even see. Like, imagine if we could see wind. We'd just feel like that all the time. And just the weather, the trees, nature. Think of every person. Think of the significant people in your life right now. Good and bad, either or. Your choice. I'd recommend good, but that's me. Now think of a few people, maybe even just one, who means just the world to you. Think of how you met. Think of all of the polarities that had to have happened from birth, what kind of childhood they must have had to have had for them to go through the necessary catalysts and polarities to be attracted to that thing, that person get their heart broken to learn this lesson, then go over there and travel and learn this thing that later down here you're going to find really interesting. Just that journey for themselves, all the people they had to interact with, all the people those people had to interact with, so on and so forth. To the farmers that grow your food, what polarities did they have to go through to get interested, to want to grow the food that you now eat? Think of that entire dance and still complain.
You almost can't, right? Like,
and sure, there's someone in your life that's likely a pain in the ass or that's broken your heart that you think you can't forgive. But then you think, well, what am I here to do? One of my lessons in this life is to forgive. Well, you're going to need someone to forgive. There you go. Give them a hug. They've given you a chance to do that. And I can't remember where the story comes from, but there was this story of there's these two souls in the cosmos, and they're kind of just hanging out, being infinitely everything and nothing, as you do. And one of the souls says to the other, I've got to reincarnate. And the other soul, oh, really? Why? Yeah, I've got to go back to Earth. I didn't learn my lesson, so I've got to go back and pass type thing. And you want to go back there? It's full of this, it's full of that, and blah, blah, blah. I know, but I've got to go back. When I said before I wanted to learn this and I didn't learn it, I got confused and off track, blah, blah, blah. And then the other soul says, sorry, so I need to go back. I need to forgive and learn compassion and to become a whole soul. And then this soul says, do you know what? I'm going to incarnate with you. And I'm going to come down and I'm going to break your heart into a billion pieces. That's how much I love you. I'm going to give you the opportunity to learn that lesson. Let's go. From an earth logic point of view, that makes zero sense. But if you can transcend that, then you can hopefully look back at a relationship and let them off the hook a little bit. More importantly, let yourself off the hook and see the bigger, grander dance going on. Not only here in the universe, not only here on Earth, but everything that we see and do not see as well. Because there's a lot more things that we don't see than what we do see. But even the dance with all the people you've met, let alone all the animals and the trees, and just, yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty mind-boggling, right? Pretty mind-blowing when you come back to thinking of it in that scheme, and realizing that we're all in this together, right? Like, we're not here. I think that's one of the things that we're working on as a collective at the moment is just the idea of trying to drop that separation, right? Like that you are separate from everyone else because, like you said, think about all the things, the people in your life, and coming to realize, I suppose, that we all do have so much more in common with each other than we don't.
Yeah, but it's hang on, I'm going to move you so I'm not blinded anymore. It's 10% better. Yeah, I mean, we take everything personally, right? According to our own hearts, we're the only ones who've ever been hurt. We're the only ones who've ever been victimized. But I mean, how many people are in therapy because they met you? You personally.
Fuckload. I hope not too many. But yeah, like that's it, eh? Yeah, fuck. what do I say from there? Jeez.
Well, we're that time of day now where
Yeah,
it's coming in and it's not the hottest day, but it's hot.
getting warmed
That's
up.
it.
Yeah, that's awesome, Matt. We'll try and wrap it up, mate, in a short period of time, because it's been an amazing conversation. I think we'll definitely have to go back and listen to this a couple of times. So I'd recommend that for all people. There's a lot that we've talked about, so it's been absolutely amazing. I can't remember if I asked you these questions last time, Matt, but I'll ask them again anyway. So, what would you say you've changed your mind on, Matt, over your career? And what do you think the most important lesson you have learned is?
What have I changed my mind on? I guess talking about the victim thing, I used to be the victim for sure growing up. I grew up very angry. So when I grew up, I lost my mum very early on, and I suppose I was angry at God for taking her.
Mm,
And it wasn't until I met Paul, who was really he's the first guy that put words to what I was experiencing. That was probably what I found one of the most valuable. Sure, the technicals, the information's all right too, I suppose, but for me, that was like the heart and soul of it. And when I kind of, you could technically say it's changing my mind, but it was really for me a realization of I didn't need to be angry because she could help me more from a different place. And that was probably the biggest shift in that regard, as well as, well, no, I don't need people's approval to live. I can do that on my own. So I think that's probably the biggest change of mind. I'm not sure if that's what you meant. That's just what came. What was the second part
mm.
to that? Sorry.
The most important lesson you have learned.
Well, arguably that too.
Yeah.
We learn lessons, of course, technical knowledge and all that stuff, and that's important. Um, but I mean, let's say in 40 years' time, how much of that technical information are you going to learn, or sorry, retain? And
Mm.
but these moments in life that are really just like soul shifting kind of thing. They're huge. They're the lessons. They're,
Yeah. Shifts in
yeah,
consciousness. Powerful
yeah.
stuff. Matt, if you go back and give your 18-year-old self some advice, what would you tell
Put
them?
it on black instead. Um, 18. What was I doing when I was 18? I was greenkeeping. You know what? I wouldn't change it. I'd just say trust the process.
Mm.
Sure, there would have been a relationship. I would have said do that different. But that wouldn't created the necessary polarities that I went through to get to here. So yeah, wish I had sent these before so I could sit with them. For the half.
Sorry, mate. No, I think that's a good one. Trusting the
Mm.
process. I think that's definitely be like the case for me as well, right? Like learning how to trust that, as you said, every experience that is coming into your life right now, or that you have experienced in the past, it's there for a reason. It's there to teach you
Yeah.
something. It's there to help you grow and evolve. So just embrace it.
I mean, I'd love to say there's been a lot of life defining moments, some good, some bad, but without the good and the bad, there's no real dance. So,
Mm.
um, sure, I would have loved to have treated some people differently, but I was sort of young and dumb then. Now I'm old and wise, obviously, but or wise. Um, so that's kind of, yeah. I'd love to have a better answer, but that's the one that I could honestly say in this current space time illusion nexus.
Mm. Cool. I like it. I like it. Who would you say are the three most influential people in your life, Matt, and
Obviously,
why?
you, Dan.
Thanks,
That's
thanks,
going
mate.
past the obvious. I would say Paul. Obviously, he was the first person to, technically, kind of gave me a career in a way, something to study. I would say Paul CHEK, because he was the first guy that showed me I could do this on my own and not. I didn't need to go necessarily do well at school to go to uni to get the high-paying job to pay my way in the world. So he was the
Mm.
first kind of example I had of that, and he also was the first person to actually help me put words to the experiences I had as a kid and as an adult. And those words, I guess, kind of gave the ego something easier to navigate through. So I didn't feel, um, when you can put words to something, it just sort of helps you digest it and accept it a little bit, the good and the bad, instead of just feeling lost with it and not knowing really what to do. So I'll tell you Paul for that reason. Um, I'd have to put JP Burrell for sure. He's, for those of you who don't know, he's a French osteo who really kind of westernized the whole visceral manipulation thing. And he, similar to Paul, when he talks, you listen. And he's quite a deep guy when you kind of get through the clinical therapy stuff, but also his knowledge of anatomy is just ridiculous. Like, studies anatomy at the microscopic level, and just the amount of attention to detail in everything that he does. He's still, I think he'd be pushing mid late 70s now, maybe even 80. Still works full time, just loves what he does. Um, has a massive thirst for just knowing more and more and more and more. And I mean, that's pretty inspiring. Still working full time, 80, no sign of slowing down. Just loves what he does and loves teaching what he finds as well. I'm trying to think who the third person would be. You know what? I'm going to say my ex fiance. No, I didn't see this
Mm.
coming either. This is what came up purely for the fact that that was the first relationship where I actually stood in my power, I could arguably say. And that just set off like a full cascade of stuff and learning potentials. And yeah, unfortunately, we had the label of being engaged at the time, which comes with its own, you know, legal ramifications. Yeah, that was a fun time. But yeah, I'm going to say not just her, but that whole event, because that's what really sparked the spiritual development thing for me. And I probably should say Dad as well, because when he got sick, that really sparked the student journey for me as well, which is, I think that was 2011 or 10. He got sick, so yeah, that's what really sparked that. So I know you asked for three, I gave you four, but probably come up with 10 others.
No, that's
You know.
cool, mate. That's all good. It's been a riveting conversation, Matt. So I really want to thank you for your time and your expertise.
Most welcome.
So
Thank you for
it's
having
been
me.
good. It's been good. Anything else, Matt, that you'd like to say that we didn't cover in our conversation? I mean, what didn't we cover?
True. We'll go into the religion thing next time. But yeah,
Beautiful.
no, I just want to say I think you're doing a great job bringing this holistic mindset to the athletic world. It's much needed. It's much overdue. It's much it's a much needed discussion that needs to be had. And yeah, well done you for following your heart and doing it, and also the studies as well. So
Thank you very much, Matt. Yeah, it's one of those things, right? Like it's not, as you know, it's not an easy thing to do, you know, whatever it is that you're doing and then put yourself out into the world, right? Like it's as you said, we may have fears of judgment or fears of not good enough or that sort of thing, but just the very act of doing it, I think, is one of the easiest ways to disempower those beliefs.
absolutely, take control of it, because it's all available, and the only thing that's going to stop it is your belief of whether you allow it or not.
Yep, that's it. Awesome, Matt. Well, thanks so much for your time, mate. Yeah, look forward to part 3.
Absolutely, brother. Okay,
Thanks,
bud.
mate.